Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Today we have Liz Shipton. I think that's your author name, correct?
Yes.
And she, am I right? YA, correct?
Yeah, I write both YA and NA, but I'm here mostly to talk about YA.
Okay, well, we can talk about both because this podcast is for everything. So,
awesome.
Yeah, and I was reading through your bio. We have a lot in common, so I'm really excited to hear your story and how you got started in writing.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to jump in? Do you want to jump in at the beginning of the story or jump in with your favorite series?
I can tell you a little bit about how I got started writing and the first series that I wrote, and a little bit about myself and books overall, I guess.
Yes, that sounds good.
Cool. All right. So I write both YA and NA dystopian sci-fi fantasy. I got started writing when my boyfriend and I moved onto a sailboat and decided to sail that sailboat around the world. We spent about a year sailing down the Pacific coast of the United States and through Mexico. And during that time, I wrote like the first book in that series, which is called Salt. And it's kind of very, I want to say loosely based, but it's not. It's like very tightly based on my own real life and like adventures, sailing, and kind of I got to incorporate a lot of the places that we were traveling through into the book and a lot of the experiences that I was having into the book, and sort of filtered it through this lens of a dystopian water world, where two people are forced to sail across this like deadly ocean together, and they fall in love as they're going. And then the book kind of ended up turning into this series, which is at this point, I think that there's 7 books out, one in pre-order, and then there's going to be 9 total, I think, when the series is all said and done. So yeah, it kind of got away from me and turned into this really, really big thing that I had never really intended to. But yeah, I'm really enjoying writing it. People seem to like it, so yeah.
Fun. Yeah, you sound like me. Like I can't let my characters go. So then
Yes.
I just need to think up new scenarios to put them in.
Yeah, I really fell in love with the characters and just wanted to continue writing them. So I planned it to be a trilogy, and then I got to the end of the trilogy and I was like, it doesn't really feel done. I'm just gonna write another trilogy. So I did that.
Fun. So I think in the end it sounds like you'll have 3 trilogies then.
So it's 2 main trilogies, and then currently there's 2 prequels, and then there will be a third prequel. So okay. It's like 2 trilogies and 3 prequels.
Oh, fun. Well, yeah. Tell us about the main characters, a little bit about more about their situation.
Sure. So the main character in the first trilogy is called Bird. She is a 19 and a half-ish-year-old girl, very much based on myself, kind of a wreck. Not really, doesn't really have her, can I swear on this podcast or
yeah,
no?
Moderate swear words, yeah.
She doesn't really have her shit together. She's sort of falling down a path of like abusing alcohol and basically just kind of a selfish mess, train wreck of a person. She makes some really poor decisions in the beginning of the book and ends up having to flee her hometown by sailboat because in the world, the only way that you can really get around is by sailboat because most of the world is covered in water. She has this like long suffering, sort of her polar opposite sailing instructor named Sargo, who gets roped into coming with her because it's his boat. She basically sort of gets him to take her on this trip. And then they embark on this voyage across the Salt, which is, this big body of water, and they meet pirates and they weather, really harrowing seas and storms. And Bird's like on this quest she discovers she has a brother, and so she's going to find her brother. Then they find him, and there's a big plot twist at the end that I won't give away. But anyway, yeah. So Bird sort of learns throughout the first book. She does a lot of growing in terms of just realizing what a jerk she is, and so, like, somewhat overcoming her issues with alcohol, although that kind of proceeds throughout the rest of her trilogy. She learns a lot about like where that is coming from, and it has a lot of like mental health implications and stuff that don't really get explored until the third book. But yeah.
That sounds really fun. And so you came up with the idea because you were sailing, right? Did you ever think you would write a book? Were you a writer before or in the industry?
I think I was one of those people who had always kind of wanted to write a book. And when we took off on this trip, I realized this lifestyle gives you a lot of freedom. It's not a terribly expensive, like we don't have a lot of overhead costs and expenses. So I'm able to support us doing kind of part-time freelance work. So that's my other day job, is as a freelance writer. And that leaves me a lot of time to be able to write and work on books. So I kind of realized, like, okay, if I'm going to do this, if I want to give writing a shot, now's the time. And I kind of just jumped in and figured, all right, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to really go for it and do it. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I did. And then I wrote 9 books.
Just, how many years later? 4 years later?
2 years later.
Wow. Yeah, I wrote a lot. I was publishing probably like 3 books a year. So yeah, that's a lot of writing.
It's been a very intense, like last year, and I thought it was going to get easier this year, but it actually I don't think it is. I think maybe next year I'll like let up on the pace a little bit. I think 3 books a year sounds like a really good, nice pace. Last year was too much. I probably don't want to repeat that, but yeah.
Fine. So that's your new adult series. Is it clean new adult or is it new adult?
So actually, I have 2 versions of the same series. One is a YA version, which is clean, in which the characters are like 17 to 19. It's upper YA, but it's all clean. There's one like fade to black scene. And then I have the same series as an NA series where the characters are aged up a little bit, and that goes basically like it's the exact same plot line, the exact same arc of the romance, but you just get sort of like, more of the spicy scenes in
right there. Interesting. Yeah. So how did you come up with the idea to write the same series in those different genres?
So I started out it started out as a YA series, and when I started writing it, actually I didn't even really want any romance in there at all. I wanted it to just be kind of like a straightforward adventure. And then through the course of writing the series and through doing research into the genre, and getting on TikTok, I discovered that romance is really big. People like romance, and particularly in YA, I think people like YA romance, which makes sense. Like teenagers falling in love is a big part of being a teenager. So I wrote a clean romantic subplot for the YA series. And then once I got to the end of that series, I was getting more into book talk, and I was learning about how big like spicy romance is. When I started writing the book, I didn't even know spicy romance was really a thing. And then I kind of discovered like ACOTAR and all those sort of spicy book talk books. And I was kind of like, I wonder if I could write that. It seemed like kind of an interesting challenge. So originally what I did was I went back and I just wrote bonus scenes for the books, kind of thinking like maybe I'll release them to readers through a subscription platform or something like that, or it's just as bonus extras. And then I liked the scenes so much, and I liked what it added to the story, that I decided to just put them in the books and release the series again as an NA series. So yeah, currently I have both series out simultaneously in the world, and people reading both, which is nice.
So you just added, you leveled, aged up the characters. Are they different named characters? They have different names?
No, they're the same characters.
Okay, so you aged them up, added some spicy scenes. Did you call them different titles?
No, there's totally, so I'll show you, actually. I have them both here. They have different covers. So this is the YA version of the book, and then this is the NA version.
Okay.
Um, and then the NA version is available on Amazon, in KU, through all those retailers. The YA version I sell only through direct sales on my website because Amazon won't let me have both series at the same time.
That's what I was wondering. How do you have the same
Yeah.
title with different content up there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For a while, it would let me have two ebooks. It seemed to be fine. Amazon seemed to be fine with having two ebooks with similar content like that. But then when I came to publish the paperbacks, it didn't like that. So I took the YA series down from all of the retailers and moved it only to direct sales on my website. And then I have the NA series available kind of like wide and through the retailers.
Oh, fun. This is intriguing to me. I've been told the first series I wrote was it's a clean new adult, but it's about a girl who overcomes anorexia. And there is also romance subplot, right? But a lot of people, and it's fictionalized, but based on my story. But a lot of people said to me, it feels like a high school book because like the characters weren't as mature as people were in college. And I was like, well, I guess I wasn't very mature. But yeah, that got me thinking, maybe like I rewrite the series and have the girl like in a boarding high school or something. I don't know. And yeah, so anyway, interesting to me, kind of off the path of talking about your book, but
yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, this all came out of me just sort of like diving into the indie author world, having really no idea what I was doing and being like, well, why can't I just do this?
right.
And just being like, well, no one's gonna stop me, so I might as well just see what happens. But yeah, I get similar comments about like, well, your characters are so immature, and it's like, well, I think I'm probably just immature.
When stuff happens to you, sometimes your growth is stunted, right?
Yeah.
Your maturity maybe is stunted. I don't know.
Yeah.
So what is your website? We're going to say it at the end, but say it now too, so we can make sure.
You can find everything at lizshipton.com.
lizshipton.com. So the YA people can find their YA books there, and the new adult people can find the books on Amazon. Probably links from your website too, I'm guessing.
Yes. Yeah. If you go to my website, you'll find everything. It's all there.
Okay. So talk to me about the prequels. Do they talk about the world, or they talk about Bird's history, or how did you go with those?
Yeah. So the first prequel I wrote is actually, so there's like two novellas in one book. And those two novellas basically, it goes back in time like about 20 years, and you get to sort of see how the world got to the point that it's at. It follows the stories of Bird and Sargo's parents, basically. So in book 0, which is the first prequel, it sort of leads up to Sargo being born at the end. And then in book 0.5, it leads up to Bird being born at the end. And those are two short stories that I package in one book and sell that way. And then the other prequel is like a villain's origin story for kind of the main villain in book 1 of the series. Because
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. People really loved the villain. And I actually asked on TikTok, I was like, if I was going to write more books in this series, what would you guys want to see? And everyone was like, we want more Savage. And I was like, okay. So I wrote him like his own origin story.
Oh, fun. Yeah. So did you do a lot of research? Like, are you a scientist or science-based, or did you do a lot of research for like how this world came to be?
I did a fair amount of research. A lot of it is the main thing that happens in the prequels is there's like a massive pandemic. So that was a lot of sort of just taking from the world's experiences in the last, few years. And then I did a little bit of research into climate change. I would say that like, so the world is sort of like ravaged by climate change and pandemics. It's sort of like our world on steroids in, like 200 years. I try not to get like too super technical about the science and all that kind of stuff, because I don't think that's really what like my audience is looking for. It's all kind of there to support the characters and to support their arcs and their romance and all that.
Right, their challenges. That sounds eerily like one of my book Lovelock Ones, which is my sci-fi dystopian, they also have, it's set I guess about 40 years in the future, but they have, yeah, a lot of their world is covered with water because there's been global warming, or they don't call it that anymore, the climate change, and there has been one pandemic and another pandemic is about to hit, which is purely predicted when I published in 2019 that book. Needless to say, not a lot of people ran to the shelves and grabbed it, but that's okay.
Yeah, I was definitely, I mean, I was this is kind of the first books I'd ever written, and I think after I wrote book one, I realized like, oh, maybe people don't want to read about the world falling apart when the world like literally is falling apart. But I mean, I don't know, for most of the response I've gotten so far has been positive, so I think I kind of think that maybe people do still want to read dystopian and still want to read about people, because it's not really about the world falling apart, it's about people stopping the world from falling apart, which I think is like a very hopeful message.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it won't be exactly like our experience. We're not on a sailboat, thankfully. Right. You're on a sailboat, so I should say that. But yeah, so most people are not on a sailboat dealing with a deadly sea and an evil villain, those type of things. So it does take you out of your reality and show that resilience as well.
That's true, actually. You know, I hadn't really thought about that, about like you are kind of removed enough from your real life. I forget because it is my real life. That it's not most people's experience. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would go crazy on a ship. No, never mind. We won't talk about that.
Oh, we can. It's fine. I don't mind.
No,
it's
I'm a runner and I have to go out running every day, so I just don't imagine. Right. I can't imagine. Like, I guess you become a swimmer, right? Or you become
Yeah. I mean, we get out and we with the dog, and we actually just installed like a new roof over our cockpit up there, which is nice and flat. So I discovered I can do yoga up there, which is really nice. Yeah, I was missing my yoga for sure.
Fun. So you said you're on book 7 right now, and are you still writing Savage's prequel? Is that coming out?
So that one's already out there, but that one, there's one out and then there's going to be another. But that one I probably won't write until like next year, because I actually recently just got picked up by an agent and got a traditional deal. So the rest of this year, I'm actually going to be focused on writing the book for that trad deal. And then once that's done, then I'll be finishing up the rest of the dystopian indie series.
Fun. And what is your traditional book? Can you share that?
I actually can't share it yet because I haven't officially like made the announcement. But I can tell you that I have signed a deal. I just can't tell you who it's with or anything about the book. Maybe I should have scheduled this podcast for like 3 or 4 days from now. I could come back and talk about that.
You can come back when you publish the next book and we'll talk about it then.
Sure. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Fun. And so it sounds like you go into a little bit of a character arc with Salt and
So Bird. Salt is book 1.
Book, and Bird is the main character, and
Sargo is her like love interest.
I was close. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the arc of the second and third books?
Sure, yeah. So in book 2, okay, yeah. So basically at the end of book 1, Sargo gets like kidnapped, and then book 2 is basically Bird having to sail by herself to go get him back. Well, she has her dog. It's like her and her trusty dog. And then she actually meets another girl, because the one thing I didn't love about Salt after I had finished writing it was that there are a lot of strong female characters in it, but Bird doesn't have really any female friends, which was sort of by design because it's a lot of based on my own experience, and I don't have a ton of female friends. So in book 2, I wanted to kind of have that relationship. So she meets this other girl. They sail across the Salt together. She rescues Sargo. She learns a little bit more about her own mental state and her alcoholism and how it's all kind of playing into each other and being affected by forces that I can't really talk about without giving a lot away about the books. And then in book 3, she basically, at the end of book 2, they sort of discover this like government secret plot type thing. And then book 3 is basically like all of them coming together to, do the classic dystopian thing of overthrowing the government and saving the world.
Fun. Yeah, I still have to get to that with my sci-fi series, so that's my next challenge. But does Sargo have a voice, or is this first person or third person? How did you do that?
So it's first person. Books 1 through 3 are told from Bird's perspective. And then actually at the end of book 3, the last chapter switches into Sargo's perspective. And then books 4, 5, and 6 are all told from his perspective. Book 5, I just launched at the beginning of this month, and that's in his voice. And then, so the last book in the series is what I'm going to be working on next. And that sort of wraps up his trilogy. And I've really been enjoying actually writing his trilogy because you get to dig into his character a little bit more and find out all the crazy things that he has going on. And it's really interesting to take a character that that was like a love interest or was a side character in book 1 and get to really like unravel them and explore everything from their perspective and learn like he's kind of portrayed in books 1 through 3 as being this sort of like solid, resilient, like opposite of Bird. Like Bird's this like train wreck, doesn't have anything together, and Sargo's this sort of like responsible, a little bit uptight, like her rock. But then in books 4, 5, and 6, we kind of find out that he's like not really all that stable underneath and has a lot of his own stuff going on, and he kind of falls apart and comes back together. And I haven't gotten to the coming back together part yet. He's at the end of book 5, he's like really a mess. But we're hoping that he's gonna get it together in book 6.
Fun. So what were your reactions to that kind of, it's not a character switch, because if you think about it logically, a lot of people have this outside facade that they can hold everything together, but internally they're struggling with, or doing whatever their innards are doing. So have you had any feedback as that didn't fit or that was really different? No.
I haven't, I don't think, no, I think most people were very like wanting to kind of know what was going on in Sargo's head. And I would try to be really careful because I definitely didn't want it to be like, oh, all of a sudden this character is not anything like I thought he was. And I wanted it to make sense, and that whole part of him sort of putting up the facade is a big part of like the issues that he faces in book 4, 5, and 6. It's like he has a lot of stuff going on underneath that needs to be addressed, but then it's also that that difficulty of like putting up that wall and learning how to kind of like not do that anymore. So like in my mind, that kind of makes sense that like books 1 through 3, he appeared to be really stable, but actually was not.
Yeah, and you have to be a little bit vulnerable to have those deeper relationships, right? So that would lead into that, I think. Yeah, I had a character who was half vampire, half witch character, and it's called the Kingdom Journals. But anyway, so different witches would tell the story, and in the first book, she told her own story, but when it got to somebody else telling her story, people were like, "Oh, that's not how I thought of her," or "That's not." But I was trying to look at it as she experiences herself maybe a little different than what other people would experience her as, right? So I don't know. Anyway, that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tough. It's definitely hard trying to strike a balance of keeping your readers happy and also writing, what feels true to yourself. I think at the end of the day, I always just go with what feels true to me, and like not regardless of what readers say. I definitely always listen to them, and I always want to do what makes them happy. But like at the end of the day, I'm gonna do what feels right for me. And I kind of made that decision a long time ago. I was like, you know what? I might not ever make any money at this. I might not get anywhere with it. So I might as well be writing stuff that I enjoy and want to write. Like, like that's got to be kind of the foundation. Otherwise, what am I even doing, really?
Right. Yeah. I think if you don't enjoy doing it, then for me, at least, it would be, I'm not going to do this. But fun. And so for Savage, how far back in the past did you go with the evil villain character?
So it starts with him as like, I think he's like 12, 11 or 12. And he basically, it's like the pandemic from his perspective. So he survives it. And then it's like his life after and how it was kind of affected by that. And him, I think, I forget exactly what happens in chapter one. It starts out chapter one with him as I think like a 20-year-old. And then we jump back in time in chapter two to him being like 12. And then chapters 2 through 7 are like him kind of growing up. And then from chapter 7 on, it's him as like a 20-something-year-old, falling in love and experiencing all his trials and tribulations.
Interesting. So is he part of this government that they're trying to bring down? Is that his evil?
No, he gets involved in it through the girl that he's pursuing. And then I can't really say much more without giving
we don't want to give any spoilers. So.
There's a lot of plot twists in like all of my books. It's like difficult to say a lot about the like underlying plot without giving.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. It sounds interesting. Sign me up. I still have to figure out if I'm going to read the NA or the YA one though. So that's a fun choice to have though.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I definitely have people I've actually had some readers who read the NA versions themselves and then have bought the YA editions for their kids and are kind of reading them simultaneously, which I think is so cool. Yeah, that makes me really happy. Like such a cool thing to do, to like read the same book as your kid.
Right. That is fun. Yeah, I read tons with my daughters. All of those series that were that came out 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, we read them all together, so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
What else do you want to tell listeners about you and your work?
So another thing that I do that's kind of fun is if people want to find me on TikTok or Instagram, I make these silly like fantasy trope videos where I poke fun at romance tropes and fantasy tropes and like men in romance books and all this kind of stuff. And some of those videos have done like pretty well. That's actually where the majority of my readers and my following have come from. So if you're into like silly comedy videos that poke a little fun at like men with wings and shadow daddies and that kind of thing, you can find me on TikTok or Instagram. I'm Liz Shipton. And yeah.
It sounds like a fun way for me to binge watch the videos on TikTok.
Yeah, I have playlists. You can go and like watch all of them. People seem to really enjoy those. So yeah.
That's tons of fun. Well, tell everyone where you can be found again, so we make sure we have those.
So you can find me at lizshipton.com. You can find me on TikTok or Instagram at Liz Shipton. I'm also on Facebook, Liz Shipton Author. And then my NA books are available on Amazon. The ebooks are in KU. The paperbacks are wide. And then you can find the YA editions of my books at my online bookshop at lizshipton.com.
Fine. Well, thank you so much for being here, Liz.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.